Hello, welcome to 60 Minutes tonight. It is June 28th, 1978, and tonight our topic will be about racism in schools across the country.
We will have a special guest today who is Dr. Rue, and she will be talking to us about the Boston busing crisis that has happened a few years ago but is still happening today.
And our second guest is Justice Powell of the Supreme Court, who will be talking to us about the Bakke case.
Hope you enjoy the show. Dr. Rue, how did busing start, and what exactly is it?
In 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was passed, and so that basically said that all public schools had to be desegregated. Now, Boston didn't exactly follow those rules, and most of its schools were still segregated, and so they didn't desegregate their schools. So in 1965, the Racial Imbalance Act was passed, and that said that schools that had 50% or more of its students as a minority had to balance that out with white students. And once again, Boston did not do that. So in 1974, Judge Garrity implemented busing as a way to solve the racial imbalance in schools. And so busing is basically just the transportation of kids to different schools. So in an all-black neighborhood, half of those kids would be taken to a white neighborhood and enrolled in a white school. And that would happen in the white neighborhoods as well. And so it was just a way to sort of balance everything out.
How was busing reacted to at the start of it in 1975?
People were very upset. On the first day of school on September 12th, kids stayed home because they didn't want to go to school. But also they were really afraid of violence that would break out in school because of racial tensions that were already kind of high in Boston. And so much violence happened that people referred to it as the Little Rock of the North.
Wow, that's very intense. So, why do the people of Boston dislike busing?
They dislike it for a few reasons. The first reason is that parents move to neighborhoods near schools usually so their kids can go to those schools.
Right.
And parents are getting angry that their kids are being taken away from areas that they live in with a school 2 minutes away to areas where an hour and a half away.
Other than being so far away from schools, why did other Bostonians dislike busing?
Well, also because it had such an impact on the children's physical health when it started, because kids would get beat up, get called many racist names, and it just wasn't good for their mental or physical health.
Right.
And then also another reason is because kids were so afraid to go to school, their overall education is being taken away from because they're not going to school, so they can't learn, and so all of that is just not allowing the kids to learn as much as they could. And then, of course, there are some racist reasons as to why people don't want busing to happen. So, at South Boston High School, the kids there are not so accepting because they've grown up in this very, guarded area where they only have to deal with other Irish-American Catholics and not with black people. And the blacks have had to do that, too. They haven't grown up near whites their entire life. And so people just don't want to integrate. And that's also why Boston didn't do this before. Just because people just don't want to.
And so were there people who were not against busing, who liked busing?
Yes, there were. There were a few people who liked busing. It was a minority in Boston because they just didn't like it. But the people who did like it liked it because it integrated schools, and they were for integration because they supported the civil rights movement. And so it brought diversity into schools. And then also they liked it because the quality of education in African-American schools was so low compared to the quality of education in white schools. They thought that the black children had the same right to education as white children do. So they wanted them to get the same experience that they did.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rue.
I'm Rachel, and I have with me today as my guest Justice Lewis Powell from the Supreme Court. He is here to shed some light on the Bakke case, which just ruled in favor of Alan Bakke, stating that UC Davis may not use quotas to achieve racial balance in their medical school class. Who exactly is Alan Bakke?
Alan Bakke is a 31-year-old engineer who was declined admission to the UC Davis Medical School for the second time. And he discovered that the medical school had fixed quotas for minority groups, and he felt that UC Davis had discriminated against him because he was white. And so Bakke filed his case against UC Regents because he believed that the less qualified minorities were admitted over better qualified white students like himself. And he just thought that it was basically unfair, and he thought that he should get in, which was kind of like reverse discrimination. But
So what exactly was his claim, and who was his lawyer, and what did he say?
So Baki's attorney was Renaud Colvin, who claimed that affirmative action based on race is unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, which says that all people should be guaranteed equal rights. And yes.
Nice. All right. So you feel that affirmative action is unconstitutional?
So no, let me qualify that. I felt that fixed quotas for minorities under the guise of affirmative action is unconstitutional, and preferring members of any one group for no reason other than race or ethnic origin or discrimination for its own sake. And the Constitution forbids this under the 14th Amendment. And one could say that Baki had been reversely discriminated against. In fact, the white majority is, composed of other minority groups and not just the whites. I gave Baki the admission to UC Davis, and and got rid of the use of quotas through the UC Davis.
Good. So what was the UC's reaction to his admission?
So first, let me tell you the reaction of Thurgood Marshall, and he was one of the judges who opposed Baki's admission into UC Davis, and he was upset of the loss of the quota system because he believed that it did help the reduce discrimination of minorities throughout the UCs and in all their school systems. And he explained that to this day that the blacks are discriminated against and that meaningful equality remains a distant dream.
Good. So what was your reaction?
UC schools should treat each applicant as an individual and not just based on their race. And the qualifications of each student is what really matters, and not just what their racial background is, because that's obviously violating the 14th Amendment by not granting equal rights for all, because by accepting students into schools according to quotas only, the graduates may not, they might not even be qualified, for their jobs after graduation of college or even like during college. They might not be applied, they might not be qualified because they just got in based on their race and not because of their qualifications.
True. So, but it's still, I'm a little fuzzy about the difference between race-based quotas and affirmative action. So what exactly is the difference?
So race-based quotas have a specific number of spaces reserved for a particular minority group, and affirmative action would consider other factors other than race to create a diverse student body. So, for example, other important factors that affirmative action should consider are economics and the socioeconomic class that the applicant is coming from. And so the root of the controversy is not only about the student who is getting accepted into college, but what kind of education and situation they had beforehand. It's the poor minority students who would really benefit from the affirmative action program, because these are the students that need an extra push so that they can get an equal chance and opportunity of education and a good profession. So, but a much greater problem to solve in not using affirmative action programs would be to solve how to prepare those children from the poor inner city schools for higher education. So if actions were made to help these students at an earlier age, then there would be more qualified minorities entering universities, and there might not need for affirmative action because there'd always already be the qualified minorities, and you wouldn't need to do the quotas, and just the qualified minorities would be within the school.
Right. So can you summarize it for our viewers just to give an overall?
Yeah. So Baki did deserve to get accepted into medical school at Davis because his GPA was higher than those test scores of the minorities that got accepted for the racial quotas. And under the 14th Amendment, if Baki had not been accepted into UC Davis, the refusal of admission would be considered unconstitutional. The elimination of quotas from the affirmative action program at Davis was also the right decision, and applicants should be judged on their qualifications and not just the racial background. However, unless the selection process is made available to the public, we'll never know how a student is chosen. It might be because of their racial background, or it might be because of their qualifications, or it might just be both.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you, Justice Powell, for telling us all about the Baki case. Thank you, and good night.